So I was one of the last people to pick up and read The Way of Kings. Because of that, I am not going to do a spoiler-free review. There will likely be spoilers in this video. Instead, what I'm going to do, as I finally picked it up and am now added to everyone else that has read well in this genre, I'm going to pick out 10 things that I really liked in The Way of Kings, only the first book, and talk about why I like those elements in the book. I'd also like to hear what you have on your list of elements that really made you love this book. Identify why it's so great. And if you don't think it's great, you can let us know that too, but you might be in the minority there. So this list is going to go from 10 to 1 of the elements that I like in The Way of Kings. Number 10 is, I love how we follow the war in this book. We follow it through the people on top that are moving the chess pieces and figuring out what the best strategies are in order to win the war by currying power and kind of having those top politics that are always interesting to follow that you'll see in a lot of fantasy books. But I also love how we are following bridge crews. We are following the people at the very, very bottom, the people who are meant to die, the people who are seen as little above animals in reality in the spectrum of this society and how they're viewed. And I think a lot of books would follow soldiers. And the fact that we're following people who don't even have the ability to defend themselves traditionally, that don't even have training in fighting, that are meant just to die, is something that I think that this book did that is unique, but it was also something very interesting to follow, as Brandon Sanderson had to be more creative to make this purposeful than if he were working with common soldiers. Number 9 is something that I didn't really even notice at first until I was far into the book, and that is the unpredictable flow. There was many times throughout the story where we've had a lot of build-up, and there's just a lot going on to build up to something big, and you can tell something's going to happen. And sometimes something does, but in many of those instances, the build-up is not necessarily to get somewhere, but is just good background. And I think that while we're reading books, we're used to giant dopamine rushes and saying something is building up and then we're gonna get something huge, whoa, next chapter something huge, whoa. And not to say that there's no big events in this book, because there are, but we don't have it constantly, and sometimes the build-up is to something that is not as big as you thought it would be, and sometimes it is bigger than you thought it would be. And I think that the focus on the characters and story in the background, and not on those little dopamine hits every single chapter of something giant happening, was a huge strength of this book that you don't see everywhere. Number 8 is that our characters don't have complete control of what happens to them, even though they do have control over how they react to the situation. One thing that was interesting is we're following the backstory of Kaladin throughout a lot of the book, and in the beginning of his backstory you see that tension of, is he going to end up being a surgeon like his father, or is he going to choose to be a soldier, which he does have a little bit of an inclination to. As you see at the beginning of the book, he is a soldier, and as you see his path, you assume that he chose to be a soldier. And I guess in a way he did, but not in a way that was deliberate choice. He wanted to be the surgeon, but ended up being the soldier because of circumstances with his brother being drafted into the army as a young boy. And I think the fact that we had this illusion that Kaladin was going to have this great choice, but in reality, fate had a different path for him, was something that I really liked. And you could see this with other characters as well, where you don't always get to choose everything that happens to you, and that sense of fate, while it's still being realistic, was something I enjoyed in this book. Another thing I liked in this book is, right now in fantasy, grimdark's very popular, and this really isn't grimdark. Not to say that I don't like grimdark for what it is, because I really do like books that take that route. But I think what's interesting about this book is, even though we have perspectives where light eyes are bad, dark eyes are good from Kaladin and other characters, this does not mean that that's always 100% true. We do have people who are very honorable, and although most people don't meet the ideal, although most people are not exactly what they're supposed to be, we do have honorable people who choose to be so, like Dalinar, and they really do try to meet up to those ideals that they're supposed to have. I think having mix of characters who are in it for themselves and in it for the game, like Sadeas, and characters who are choosing to be honorable and do things that might not even be immediately in their best interest is great, because I feel like that is how the real world functions. We have people who are trying to be good people actively, trying to meet ideals, and we have people who are playing a game. And I think having both of those in this book was a strength. So it's kind of like that combination, the classic fantasy of the moral heroes that are trying to do what's great, and kind of like the modern grimdark, everyone has motives and things they're trying to do, but it kind of combines those two to have a more realistic approach. Number 6 is the uncertainty the reader has of reality, which models the uncertainty that the characters have in the book. One that I really liked was, you don't know if Sadeas is about to betray Dalinar throughout the entire thing. He has conflicting information. Some is that his visions tell him to trust Sadeas, and then at the same time, it seems like Sadeas is going to betray him, so you never really know. And then when you think everything is calm and things have settled down, you get a betrayal. But as the reader, you are kind of questioning if Sadeas is going to do this or not. You kind of have this moment of, am I crazy? Am I reading these signs correctly? And I really liked that. Another example is Dalinar's visions. You don't know if they're real or fake, if he's just a crazy senile old man, or if these visions actually mean something. And while you might have a tendency to believe one way or the other, there is enough thrown into the book to make you doubt, to make you wonder. And I think that reader uncertainty of reality is really nice, because it kind of mimics how the characters are feeling in the book, and it was done really well. Number 5 is, I love how we kind of get to see different stages of Kaladin's progression as far as his kind of like his mental health. You see moments in time where he kind of doesn't believe he can do anything, that he feels hopeless, that he has real bouts of depression. And I feel like the way it was portrayed was pretty realistic and important to see, that even our character that does amazing feats and is basically chosen goes through hard times where he doesn't think he can keep going, where he doesn't think he can pull anything up, where he doesn't think he really has control, or maybe be unlucky. And I think seeing those different stages of how he feels and about how that affects not only how he sees the world, but what he's able to do in different circumstances and different moments is something really healthy to see, and still have him to be the hero is something that I really appreciated. Number 4 is the approach that we have on idealism in this book. And I have these conversations all the time, because in my own life, I am not an idealist, not even close. Not to say that I don't have things that I think are important, things that aren't, and I don't have ideals, so to speak, but I'm not very much an idealist. I don't know how to describe that. But when it comes into this book, there's things that specifically Kaladin is trying to do, where he's trying to save everyone on his bridge crew, where he's trying to fix everything, where he's trying to take responsibility and make an ideal situation out of a situation that is basically they're bridgemen and they're going to die. And I think at first I was definitely like, this guy is going to basically have some really hard times because his ideals are not going to be reached, and there's just no way. Just no way. But I like how this book portrayed his idealism and idealism in general, where, of course, everything was not going to work out perfectly. Of course, the people he was trying to save were not all going to survive, but it doesn't mean that his ideals were bad. His ideals ended up being good, in which case he was reaching for the stars, and where he landed was way above where you'd expect to land anyway. So his ideals matter. I think in a lot of books, ideals, and I kind of have like the cynical approach I have, where like idealists generally don't get anything done. But in this book, even though the ideals weren't reached, having those ideals were worth it, because he was able to accomplish something that was basically extraordinary, just something that you didn't expect him to be able to do, and it was in a way that was somewhat realistic, or at least believable enough in a fantasy book, and I really appreciated portraying an idealist as someone who was actually able to pull something off, rather than just having that little skeptical, realist approach that I have a lot of the time, and it was kind of nice to read that. Number 3 is something that I really respect Brandon Sanderson for, especially as I know he is a person of faith, and that was he portrayed both people that were following the faith system in this book and Jasna the atheist as intelligent people who had reasoning and logic that made sense. I think a lot of times when you have a tendency one way or the other as the author, you might portray people who, if you're religious, you might portray atheists as their logic isn't perfect, and if you're an atheist, you might portray people of faith as not having great logic. So I feel like that bias often is in books, but in this book, I feel like he respected both senses of logic and stay true to the type of person who would have that belief system or lack of belief system. And that was something I really appreciated, especially as he was portraying Jasna as an atheist that had logic and reasoning and was very intelligent and didn't demean her for, I guess, being the atheist character in the book, and I really appreciated that he went about it that way. Number 2 is the relationship between intention and consequences in this book. And I guess more than anything, the disconnect between the two. Because we have our idealist Kaladin who's trying to come up with these master plans that is going to save his crew. But his positive intentions don't always have positive results, like when they decided to do the side carry for the bridge crew and basically destroyed an entire battle for everyone and led to a lot of deaths in other crews. That was, great intentions, the consequence disconnected. And I liked that. I liked how he had to all of a sudden get out of his little bubble of how he was thinking of things and think of the strategy higher up. And I think that disconnect was something that was really interesting to read. And then the other one being the honor sprint and kind of like the power or whatever you would want to call it that Kaladin has, and that he recognizes that it wasn't just being unlucky, but there was something that was indeed there and sometimes caused consequences that made him feel bad about his past, made him feel bad about himself, especially in his ability to save other people. And then you end up realizing that this kind of power or honor thing that he had caused positive things, but it also caused negative things, even though maybe the intention of that power is supposed to be good. I guess I'll have to read further, find out exactly more about that. I know a little bit, but not a ton. And I think that the disconnect between intentions and consequences is something that I liked in this book and was something that was portrayed well in several storylines. And number 1 is basically this concept of humanity meets strategy. You have a lot of people who are playing a game and are trying to get something out of whatever situation that they are in, but even while they're playing a game, even while they're trying to make something happen that might be a little bit selfish and might hurt someone else, you still get to see aspects of humanity in almost everyone. One example is when Shallan goes and studies under Jasna. She's trying to steal from Jasna in order to save her family, but she still gets a connection with her and still ends up wishing that it didn't have to be the way it had to be in her mind. Another example is Kabzal, where he's trying to poison Jasna, and he's trying to do this by ingratiating himself to Shallan so that he has an easier access to Jasna. But while he's doing that, while he's trying to administer this poison, giving the antidote to Shallan every time, he builds a relationship with Shallan that might have started in a way where he had his own motive, but ended up showing a lot of his humanity, and ended up building a friendship that, although had a weak base, was real. And then a good third example would be Amaram, or however you say his name. Some of these pronunciations, I've got no idea. But where he is, of course, trying to be a leader in an army, but at the same time kind of helps out with Kaladin's younger brother, and kind of promises that he was going to try to give him a better entry into the army and put him in less danger at first. And you can see a lot of humanity in his decision that he's making to kind of help that family out through a hard time. But at the same time, in the book, we see him take the shard blade Kaladin earns for his own purposes. So you get to see that he has that strategical side, but also that human side. And I think that that is shown time and time and again in this book, and is something that I really appreciated. So those are my top 10 aspects or qualities from The Way of Kings. I'd like to hear yours as well. What did you think? How could you narrow down what you liked about this book if you liked it? I'd like to read comments about that. If you didn't like it, or if you feel like something was lacking, I'd also like to hear that too, as I would like to hear those perspectives. Haven't heard very many of those, as this is very highly rated. Anyway, thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you later.
Hi guys, my name is David. Me and Ali have recently been doing a buddy read on the first Stormlight Archive book, The Way of Kings, by Brandon Sanderson. This was a really interesting book to me. The world is so rich and detailed. It is filled with lore and history, and I really like the characters in this book. Specifically Kaladin. He is a prime example of what you should do if you want to be a good leader. He is very charismatic, he's very caring, he's very selfless, He only thinks of others before himself, and he is just a genuinely amazing person. This book is extremely dark, and it touches on grimdark elements throughout some of this book as well, which was nice. And I liked the other characters as well. Like Dalinor was good. Shallan was cool. Although I didn't get much of Shallan, but maybe in the other books we'll get more of her. But I really like this book, and I cannot wait to read the other books in that series.